on behalf of the Williamson County Library, I'm your host, Zack Johnson. Today we have a special event for y'all. It's called Poetry at the Library. We have a very special guest with us today named Lindsey. He is a very, very creative poet. He's also a teacher at Spring Hill, and he's been teaching there for the last 8 years. He teaches English literature and creative writing. So please, help me welcome Mr. Lindsey.
Actually, I retired after 18 years at Spring Hill High School. I was down there until I thought I'd die from it. Finally got out alive. I was asked to do this as a kind of an introductory thing about poetry and what it actually is and what it means today. And it's a long history, and I could probably take too much time telling you about it, but I'll make it quick and say that as a literature major and a teacher of literature, poetry has been an incredibly important part of my life forever. And so I've paid attention to where it came from and what it means. So that I know that originally it was the stuff around campfires celebrating some tribe's raid across the hills to pillage and destroy their neighbors and come back and sing their own praises and their heroes' praises. And that's how poetry began. So for me, poetry begins and ends with what it does in your soul, in your belly, in your heart. And it's a celebration. It is as much or more that than it is an intellectual pursuit. Both of those things have their place, but I don't think they can exist separately. They have to be together. And a lot of times people either get that sugary, sweet stuff out of a Hallmark card, or they get something so obscure nobody gets it. When poetry done correctly gets to everybody. You see it, you read it, you say, oh yeah, that's right. That's what it's about. In the process of putting this together, I got like 5 hours worth of poetry here to read, but I'm not going to read it all. And in the process of setting it up over here, it got stirred around. So we're going to do this as it comes. When I write about a number of themes. The things that bother me the most are, we live in a world that we weren't made for. From the time of Adam and Eve. If you wanted to go somewhere, you walked. So Socrates walked, and Jesus walked, and Julius Caesar walked. Charlemagne walked. George Washington did a lot of walking. And it's only been in the last 100 years or so that we were able to travel at speed consistently. And it has overtaken us, not just in the way that we travel, but in the way information overwhelms us. And this is a little bit about that. Arrhythmia has rolled down and settled on our last days. So for all the beginnings, there are no means, and the ends fade like freedom into the shadow of distant trees. Our garish laughter, tainted by neon, paints a clown face to hide our terror. Mirth rings hollow down the hallways and mingles with electronic games played by myopic children whose destruction is reflected in their fat faces. At home, I read a book about events that did not happen to people who never lived in a place I'd like to be. Think about the wind in my hair and the road under my feet. Pinch my wife as she passes. You better watch it. So that's what I do. And that one was called Great Escape. I have a friend who's a creative writing professor at St. Leo College. Actually, he's retired now too, in Zephyr Hills, Florida. He's put 1 million miles on his BMW motorcycles and is the person for whom the word curmudgeon was invented. And he has the same lament that I do. In fact, he told me one time, he said, Vol, you know what? We are the last literary generation. I've spent a lot of time considering that. I think it might be true. This is called Forgetful, and it's inspired by Mark Tiger Edmonds. A friend of mine rides hard, tells me he's biked 1,000,000 miles between semesters at the university where he teaches the art of language. He says, "We're the last literate ones," and he must be right. A student of mine thinks Picasso is a good investment. Not to mention Van Gogh. Did you hear what Christie gets for one of those? He has never heard the sound of blues in his bones. Nor does he know that poetry is good food. He drifts like some waterlogged leaf to the bottom and drowns in his own business. What went wrong? Did we forget to tell him that blood is red, or that those sunflowers over there, like captured stars, are beyond anything he can acquire? In response to the fact that we live such an incredibly frenetic, overwhelmed life, so sometimes I write about that, and sometimes I write about what it's like outside of that world, and that's what this one is. It's called When. Not often enough, I buy a bottle of whatever Kentucky bourbon strikes my fancy. I lay back in my chair and watch a good movie, with one with sharp dialogue and a smooth camera. Maybe an Art Deco film noir from the 30s, and take infrequent sips that taste like candy kisses from what I have poured in a little glass whose cut and trim I like. Sometimes 2 neat ounces after a long day on the road smooths the vibrations in my legs and feet, so I can sleep off the cubist visions from an 80-mile-per-hour passage through cities, farms, and forests, become mere shapes and colors in the sensory overload, which is all that's left of everything anyway. Washes off some of the zombie cynicism I tend to wear when it gets like that. But I never rush the drink or water it down. Just close my eyes, roll the caramel over my tongue, and swallow. One of my favorite poets is D.H. Lawrence. I spent a lot of time studying the modernist poets, and there are all kinds of those guys, and one of the things that they did, the important thing that they did, was they understood that between Freud and Darwin and the Industrial Revolution and Karl Marx, that everything that was important to the Western mind had been yanked out from under our feet. And so independently of one another, and maybe even unconsciously, all they were trying to do was put the rug back so we had something to stand on, and it never happened. We still wander loosely after the revolution was over, standing in the ashes and the dregs. And D.H. Lawrence's answer was, if you're going to live, live sensually, so that the experiences that you have are full and complete and not just shadows of something, not something we just run past. Here was a man who was dying of tuberculosis. He died at 46. He lived outside of Taos, New Mexico for a while. I want to do one of his poems that he wrote, understanding the importance of life. It's called Aware. I can see him sitting on the veranda of his house out there in the desert, watching the moon come up. Slowly, the moon is rising out of the ruddy haze, divesting herself of her golden shift. And so I see in the sky before me a woman I did not know I loved, and her beauty hurts my heart. I follow her down the night, begging her not to depart. I used to teach that poem to my kids, and it's because it does what poetry is supposed to do. It takes an object and turns it into a symbol that is important to all of us. And we spent that whole generation spent their time one way or another trying to draw our attention to the fact that the rug was gone. And we have to put it back. And when they couldn't find an answer, and they did not, they were followed by the postmodernists, the likes of Jackson Pollock and Allen Ginsberg and Hunter S. Thompson, and all of those people who are the heroes of that generation who said there is no answer. They couldn't find it. It must not be there. Who are we to presume that we could then show people what worked? And so they said nothing works and everything is meaningless. And about the late 1960s, early 1970s, things changed a little bit with someone called Charles Bukowski. And he began to explain that, you know what, it isn't our mission to change the world. We can't do that. It isn't our mission to teach people how to live. We can't do that. But it is our mission to grasp those seldomly found, incredibly beautiful places in time and space and encapsulate them for a moment and share what they mean and their beauty. I'm impressed with the Navajo, whose greeting and parting word is Yateha, which means walk in beauty. How nice is that? Here's a good Tennessee poem I wrote as a challenge to write something about something hot. And I knew that everybody I know, because we're poets, wrote something probably inappropriate. And so I wasn't going to do that. And so this is called Waiting. And this is absolutely true. It's happened outside my grandfather's house in north of Memphis. It's called Waiting. The high delta north of Memphis baked me brown in 1962. There was no wind, so the heat did not come in waves across the cotton, but settled down on us like God's hot breath until we could barely think. My 12-year-old arm slowly turned the crank while salty sweat blurred my vision. Everything took its own sweet time that afternoon, except the sporadic motion of the ladies' handheld funeral home fans. We barely turned our heads to acknowledge a dry comment from Papa about nothing or something. Maybe the Lord will return this year. All the signs are right. So I rubbed my eyes and looked up, still turning the crank. Everyone waited with patient expectation as they quietly broiled on the painted metal lawn chairs around the table where I labored. An uncle leaned against a peach tree a little closer than the wrist, spitting languid brown juice in slow motion at the dusty earth. The sun flicked fire at my face and bare shoulders, working steadily away while the tin cylinder ground around in the flame-lit ice, and we waited for the Lord's return, or maybe a bowl of ice cream if he was late. Let's see. And one way, you know, there's this thing about the Romantics, and the Romantics were all about a couple of things. One of them, they wrote about lofty, high ideals, and they wrote about how the way to find the truth about things was to go back to nature. And I think that a lot of the people that I know who write are still romantics in one sense, in the sense of the nature, but they understand that the lofty themes have been done. And as I said before, it's the small bits of beauty and the small little things that everybody can find some meaning in. This is called Hike. An empty forest is where I like to be, full of undergrowth and fallen limbs, the occasional tree across my path lying there all soft and fungal, a place to rest and look around or close my eyes and listen. But I'm an intruder and have stilled the movements of birds and small rodents. So unless the wind sighs some dry branch into another and rustles the leaves, I'm pretty much alone. I like the quiet. But then pick myself up and crash along, breaking twigs and branches with every step, and bring calamity to whole civilizations of little creatures. I wonder what their media and governments have to say about all the trampled villages and collapsed tunnels. I read somewhere that every step crushes 11 spiders, and no telling who else, what other microorganisms of no consequence to me left in smoking ruins, the inhabitants flying in panic. Sometimes there's a small brook of clear water making its lazy way to lower ground. I look for an outcrop in the cool damp to sit again, remove my shoes and wash my feet, just trying to get it away from it all. How did we get here? Well, here's a way. It's called restless. Since we found a way to sour Eden, we spend our days dropping sweat, working in the dirt, bending our backs and flexing our shoulders for food, shelter, and a few rough clothes. Our only music from birds and water splashing over rocks or wind in the trees. At the end of each day, sleep came fast and sure, so we woke up clean with no knowledge of our purity. But we were always haunted in our limits and never learned we could not be God. So we built machines in defiance, moved indoors to the manufactured rhythms of metallic notes, and dirtied our hands in oil. We grew fat, our minds overweight with worry. We have played Macbeth with sleep. Here's a little, it's not getting old. I don't mind that, because if I didn't get old, I'd have died some time ago, and I don't like the thought of that. I want to live about 300 years. That would do to get about half of what I want done. But dang it, I got old fast. I mean, I am still at that place on the beach in Pensacola dancing to rock and roll with my friends. And I don't know what happened in between. There was a lot of stuff and I remember it all. But boy, it went by fast. And this is called late. It's getting harder and harder to keep up. Always going back for one more look, stopping to rest while you run ahead, wandering while you rest, taking the path to the right, falling behind. I see your back as you look up and toss your hair. I want to reach for you way up there, enjoy the music, the drink, and laughter, but wait. What is this flower? See the red like blood in the center of these smooth petals and elegant green swords pointing at the swans. Don't wait for me. I'll be there after a while. I hang out over at a local business where people still use large quantities of tobacco and drink exotic beer. And interesting things happen there. One evening, these people came in, and this is about one of them I met for a minute. It's called Hard Times. It was the jacket that caught my eye. Some mystery cloth black with iridescent blotches of gold and blue or red that came and went as she turned in the light. I watched while she talked to Patrick, then handed him the money for the beer in her hand. When she passed by, I took her arm. What is this cool material? Oh, I needed a little sparkle in my life because right now I'm going through an angry hill. Her voice let me know she needed to talk. I looked into her eyes. They were green. I said, I'm so sorry. I dropped her arm and turned back to my own table. I didn't want to get involved with that one. Anyway, let's see. want to read a few more and then turn this over to one of my favorite people on the planet. The nice thing about teaching is that you get to meet amazing people and watch them open up. And I was told, I taught mostly seniors while I was teaching, and I was told when Michelle was in the 9th grade that I needed to know her, that she was an awesome person who had a grasp of what words were for and how to use them. And I don't think that year, you didn't go to the competition that year, did you? I think it was the next, I think it was too late. And they have a competition at Columbia State, and so we took her the next year, and I think you won. And it has been impressive ever since. And has gone on to college, graduated in writing, and wants to get into publishing, and so I need to know her even more. And so I'm going to let her come up in a few minutes. I just wanted to give you an indication that this will soon end and the suffering will be over. I wrote this one recently because well, it's just a commentary on how things are. It's called Good People. I was thinking about how, you know, when I was real young, about 18, and my best friend and I had our first apartment together, and we bought some illicit beer. We weren't old enough, but we were 18, and we could have been drafted and gone and killed people or been killed in Vietnam, and we felt cheated, so we bought some anyway. So he took it back to the apartment, and I just drank mine down. Joe said, Vol, don't guzzle your beer. It's good. Taste it while you drink it. And the impact of those little things, I have never guzzled beer in my life since then, because Joe's a good guy and someone whose intellect and approach to life I respect, and so I want to be acceptable to Joe, be like him, and I think we all do that we become what other people whom we respect don't mind being around. So this is about good people. Good people, the ones you want to be around, the ones who are better than you. Think clearer. Know the stuff you need to grow into their shadow are always complicated in surprising ways. They get the jokes ahead of time and catch your eye and wink. When the politicians rattle on with lungs more wasted than T.S. Eliot's land, good people shake their heads and point right at the drowned Phoenician sailor lying ragdoll in the corner of their words. Makes you wish you were that quick. They paint, they play music, race cars, or know where all the secret hot springs lie hidden in the rocks out west. They've been there. They've done that. While you stayed around the house wishing you could scuba dive or live on a sailboat in the Keys. My best friend was a cowboy until he died. Built saddles, chased wild cattle deep in the Sere Mesquite. He wrote songs and played his old Gibson with a Texas twang. One day from way down the other end of the hall came floating some blues riffs that bordered on indigo. I looked, and his back was framed in the doorway, head moving in time to a song inside, earning his ticket to ride. I miss my brother-in-law. He was a good man. I'm going to finish with this one. This is the other end of poetry. This is serious. Probably the most studied poem in history is T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, and I hate him. I hate him. The problem with T.S. Eliot is, though, everyone hates him, but he's so good. What are you going to do? In fact, William Carlos Williams said of T.S. Eliot, just when we had poetry back in the hands of the people, he comes along and sticks it back in the ivory towers. And so this is my response to T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. It's called T.S. Eliot Was Wrong. That piece of rhythmical grumbling, which by the way is what he called, later on in life, he called the wasteland a piece of rhythmical grumbling. That piece of rhythmical grumbling, the high priest's grouse against life, was wrong. April was not the cruelest month. He says himself that lilacs grow even in the dead land. Nah, April is young muscles stretched wide after sleep, ready for the day. I swarmed the yellow walls of the city of dreams where glittering jewels poured from April's strong hands, anointed my head. Look, my eyes were pearls, my laughter loud and long, and the taste of my pomegranate lover sweet on the tip of my tongue. September is the cruelest month. Its hind leg pulling out of the sun in a giant step down and away, whispering dead lies into the fog. September's 7 threats incite my rage, my red rage, my rage under the shadow of this red rock with the drowned Phoenician sailor lying ragdoll in the corner, full of taunts. This month of the dug grave as insurance for when the first fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bank, a promise, a threat, a promise leading past my hands, thrust into my ears. The nymphs have departed. Where is my city of dreams, clutching and sinking under September's first fingers? April smooths her hair with an automatic hand, turns and looks a moment in the glass, hardly aware of her departed lover. I'm going to let Michelle come up now and read. And so give us a second to change this over. Thanks.
I am for the child who lives in motels, cars, and shelters, now in foster care, a group home, where he sleeps not on a bed, but on a temporary cot. He is the child I am for. I am a CASA volunteer. I am you.
Hello everyone, my name is Michelle Awad, as Val told you. I was a student of his for 2 or 3 years at Spring Hill High School, and I just graduated from UT Chattanooga with a degree in English writing. I am mercilessly looking for a job in publishing right now, so if any of you know anyone, let me know. While I was at UTC, I was published twice. I published 2 original poems in the UTC Literary Journal, which is called the Sequoia Review, and I won a pretty sizable scholarship for one of my poems separate from those. So hopefully I'm not too bad. This first poem pretty much is a metaphor for my entire college career because I was supposed to be studying for statistics and I wrote a poem. So there's that. It doesn't have a title. I have a statistics exam at 8 o'clock in the morning, and all I can do is lie here and think about that time my car rolled backward down that embankment, because about 16% of the time I forget to put it in park before I turn off the ignition. And the way that you laughed is probably disproportionate to the way I couldn't help but laugh too. Something about the look in your eyes, plus the knowledge that my mother was going to kill me divided by the square root of your hand across mine before everything just started subtracting, and it all reduced itself until we were simplified to nothing, like we canceled each other out or something. And I thought, there is a reason the number 0 looks so empty. The probability that I will ever truly feel all right again is significantly different from how much I want to. This one I think I wrote when I was thinking about my senior prom, because we had stayed out all night just at diners and other people's houses, and we brought clothes to change into to go eat in the morning. And I, being me, forgot to bring extra shoes. So I had to wear my prom outfit because I was like, I can't wear my heels with gym shorts and a t-shirt. So I made him wear his tux and everything. But everyone at Cracker Barrel was confused. So this is just another list of all the things we used to do. I have them written on my forearms, scratched into the tops of tables. It's too early to think about it too much, to talk about him again. There's an owl hooting outside my bedroom window, and I wonder who it's signaling, to say that I'm awake and that I've done another bad thing, and I hope it tells them that this time I don't regret it. After all, this won't be the first time I conquer today in yesterday's makeup. This won't be the first time I go to breakfast in last night's dress. Thank you. All right. I have no idea why I wrote this one, so. I've never seen a change that I didn't live through. I guess it's true. Animals adapt, humans hunt and gather and eventually start praying, and then it's religion, and they can feel like something can save them. I want to seal the spaces between my fingers and toes. I want to make myself whole. I want to hold the Atlantic in both of my palms without it slipping. I want the sky to fall and the ground to rise. I want you to find entire novels in my eyes. I'm not the fittest, but I survived, and I'm not even limping. I want sunfire under my feet. I want to know by heart the floor plan of your place on the corner of Oak and 8th Street. My throat is sore from singing you to sleep. My mouth is dry from missing everything. I don't know why I wrote a lot of these. I'll explain them if they have a story behind them. He found God, someone told me. I couldn't even find my wallet or my car keys. But somewhere behind my left ear were the doubts he used to whisper at night when he couldn't sleep, and the reassuring residue of the lies I always told him is still staining my teeth. I bet you found him in your pocket, or under the trash in your back seat. Somewhere you always find things that weren't technically lost in the first place. I'm probably there too, if you'd look for me. I wrote this one because I have a really horrible back, and I go to the chiropractor a lot, and he does like a 15-minute massage every time I go, and he tells me it hurts so much, and he's like, you have to relax, and I'm like, but you're hurting me, I can't. So this is what that's about. They tell me to relax. I don't think I know how. My muscles are always tense, and I think they might be eroding from the pressure, from the red sea of my blood rushing against the cliffs of them. There are more knots in my shoulders than in my shoestrings. When I'm driving, I have to remember to release my grip on the steering wheel before my fingers seize. Even when I lie down to sleep, I have to consciously remind myself to breathe out after I breathe in. I have to force myself slowly down into the comfort of my mattress. I have to make the entire basic structure of my body stop needing you for scaffolding. This is the poem that I won. I think it was a little over $1,600, the scholarship, which was this last year when I was a senior. And then they promptly told me that the English department doesn't give scholarships to people who are graduating. So I was like, great. And they were like, we'll give it to the next best competitor. And I was like, well, you tell him that he was second best. So I wrote this. I was just actually really glad that they chose this poem because it's probably my favorite poem that I've ever written, and it's really important to me. My grandfather passed away in November, so this was one that I wrote about him, and there are a few in here, so it's one of my favorites. This is called A Bushel and a Peck. I stopped asking God for help because I don't even know him, and I don't want to be rude, and I shouldn't complain. I just never thought I'd have to ask if you know who I am, or that you would barely be able to tell me. And I think a big part of you is probably ready, but then you ask them things like, am I gonna make it? And I wonder if you are terribly afraid. I'm afraid. I'm afraid that I'll have to bury you on my birthday. I'm afraid that I'll have to bury you. I never realized how much I take after my grandmother, how I have never seen her cry until today. You are the only man who ever loved me enough to stay. Now I'm left watching you lying here, loving me, leaving. I don't know why I wrote this one either, so. And I don't write a lot of poems that rhyme. Sometimes they happen to rhyme when I'm not trying to make them rhyme, but sometimes I'll get into a fit of rhyming poems and there's no explanation. I was never any good at standardized testing. You cannot love me the same as you've loved everyone. I've been held back a few years, but maybe that was the best thing. I thought I knew the answers, but really there were none. And in my bedroom, it's no more than an educated guess. Like someone says my time's up before I even start. I cannot tell you how I feel in 1,000 words or less. I have a C+ body and an incomplete heart. I wrote this one because I was at my apartment and my roommate spent the weekend on campus. And I have a tiny Maltese. He weighs about 6 pounds. And he is very protective of me. He hates men. He hates most other people. He hates all other dogs. So I wrote this about him because I spent the whole day watching reruns of Criminal Minds, and I was terrified of being alone in my apartment. My dog knows things about me that no man knows. He knows I am restless in my sleep. When I awaken and toss into my newest position, he does not get out of bed. He does not go find himself a spot on the sofa. He stands up, he waits for me to rest my head, and he repositions himself accordingly. He knows my favorite place to be kissed, on the tip of my nose, just gently, barely once. He can tell this by the way I always smile and tell him thank you, much different from how I say it to anyone else. My dog knows things about me that I don't even know about myself. The way that dogs know things that we simply cannot fathom, things that we aren't in tune to. The way they can sense when a storm is coming, or when your blood sugar is low, or when you're going away on a week's vacation. When we're at home, he stirs and growls at every sound. He becomes agitated with every movement around me. He barks at everyone he sees approaching, and I have come to think maybe he does this for my sake. Like maybe I just have no idea how badly I need protecting. This doesn't have a title either. I remember writing it, but the story behind it is way too sordid and long for me to go into. So, where do I put this shell of my life before now? When your memory turns up on my doorstep, do I take its coat? Do I offer it a cold beer and something to eat? I don't know for whom the bell tolls or why the caged bird sings, but they probably have something to do with covering up the noises you make while you're sleeping, or the sound of you singing in the shower to me. It'd be fine if what didn't kill you just made you stronger, but what didn't kill me still has my picture in its wallet, still says hello to me when it passes on the street. They fill you with dirt and rose petals, and you don't know whether to flush yourself out or follow the red trail to the bedroom. It doesn't matter how many leaky faucets they fix or burned out light bulbs they change, you still feel broken and the same. And something about the empty space in your bed is always warmer than their jackets can keep you. This is another poem I wrote about my grandfather, but my great-grandmother just passed away in just a couple months ago, I believe. She was 96, I believe. But this is just about my family. It's called Cubism. They say this should be the time of my life, but what about theirs? You grow up just in time to see all the people who raised you disappear. I look like each of them at certain angles, like I was painted by Picasso. I am all of them at once. This white room, the woods where people used to take their dead and their dying. You taught me what it means to love well enough. Now you'll teach me what it's really like to miss something. I wrote this in a poetry workshop class that I had at UTC, and my professor really liked it. So, The Secret Garden. Behind your eyes, it is wild and quiet, like being alone in the woods. Your skin, the smell of olive oil and sage must be my imagination. I dreamed you were flying above mountains made of rose bushes, and when you got to the sea, you swam in it. That's why the oceans are salty, like the taste of your neck on my lower lip, the way it merges with my cobblestone tongue. I love when we go walking and you know all the flowers by name. There is pixie dust in the creases of your eyelids. I think you have the soul of a gypsy or a mermaid, something I shouldn't be allowed to touch with these talentless hands. I want to dance as if we were making love. I want to make love like we're dancing. This is the polar opposite of that poem. This is called Sinning on Sunday. What if, when we arrive at heaven's gates, we are judged by all of the things we didn't do instead of all of the things we did? Condemned for every time we left without kissing our husbands and wives goodbye, for every silent turn of our heads when someone asks us for money on the street, and for every neighbor's pool we didn't swim in with all of our clothes on in mid-December. Sentenced to the beige, bare walls of our empty apartments, to keep living in these crowded city buses and anonymous bedrooms waiting in line at the DMV. Doomed for all eternity because of all the people we didn't love enough or any. I still wouldn't hold you in my arms again. All right, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Vol, and maybe we'll switch it back up later.
Want to build memories with your child? Turn off the TV and read. Reading is one of the best family activities around. It's free and without commercials. Start with picture books for young children and build to storybooks and novels. Vary the length and topic of what you're reading. And read slowly enough so that your child can draw pictures in his mind about what is being read. Invite your child to turn the book's pages, or pause and ask your child to predict what's going to happen next in the story.
Mom, where have you turned that car?
Young children like to read the same book over and over. During repeat readings, stop at a key word and let your child fill in that word.
Is that the burner bone?
After you finish reading a book, reflect on it together. Build memories. Read. This Choose Success moment has been brought to you by the Middle Tennessee P16 Council.
One of the best parts about being a teacher is having students like Michelle. And I had one or two, three, four every year that were incredibly good, insightful people, like that poem I read last, good people that it was my privilege to get to know and to learn from, and to maybe get to continue to know. Years ago, I was part of a writers group. I had, back in the late 60s, ridden motorcycles and gotten away from that because, you know, you don't want to die young when your kids are there and stuff, so you have to wait till they go away and start all over again. And so I did that. And I was part of a writers group out of Vol State, and met some incredible poets there. And something happened that suddenly one day I was just walking and I met this guy, and his name was Sam, and he's a motorcycle Sam, and he just came to me 6 poems at a time until he was done telling me his story. And the whole thing is in online. I was looking, this was 2002, so that's been 12 years ago. I was looking for a place to publish them, do something with them, because they are a coherent story, but at the same time they are, each one of the poems tends to stand alone. And I was looking online for biker poetry, and I found this guy who I think is a Hell's Angel. And I approached him. He didn't say that, but I think something, you know, later on that he said made me understand that he might be. If he is, he builds a pretty neat website. And so I asked him if he wanted this, and I sent him a few, and he liked them. And so I'm going to read 3 or 4 of these to kind of close it down with. This is the public library, so some of the language is not the language of bikers. You'll have to imagine the language as a biker would use it, but you'll know what I mean when I get there. And so this was the introduction. Sam's always been able to live life the way he wanted to, as far from the cares of the everyday stuff as he could get. Figures God feeds the sparrows pretty regular, so he never worried much, just worked occasional odd jobs to pay expenses and keep the fat boy running. Thinks of himself as a modern Tom Bombadil. He likes people, but thinks modern life has robbed their souls. Sam thinks it's important to take care of his soul. The first of these is called Flashback, and it's in really small print, and my glasses are over there, so I'm going to give it my best shot. Sam was always out there riding the roads, finding out all kinds of good stuff, like how the wind feels in your hair and how to get comfortable in the rain. Says that's how he met the elves. They were on motorcycles. I think it was them made Sam move out on his own like that. He was camped beside a lonely road next to the fire, drinking coffee with bourbon against the frost he knew was coming. When they rode up, he could tell they were elves by their laughter. Says, sounded just like bells. And those elves talked to him all night in the quiet, under the stars. They thought he would understand, and he did. He says, them elves, they know. Says he learned the truth that October in the quiet under the stars. When they were done, he began to laugh. He laughed so hard the stars could hear him. They laughed too. Even some of the rocks around the camp cracked up and rolled down the slope. He laughed till he ran out of breath, and just when he thought it was over, he'd start right up again. Laughed 2 solid days and nights. Laughed long after the elves were gone. Said, who knew that truth lay in the bottom of a bucket? Sam lives in a treehouse. He hates it down there in the ground. thinks there's too much going on. It's all just a bucket for people to poop in. It's what he thinks, like bugs in a hurry, going nowhere, acting like they know something, seeking knowledge but denying the truth. Sam is perfectly happy alone with some poetry. He writes lyrics for the birds. They supply the melody, and the music is fine by him. He can dance to it. Sometimes he has to climb down through the leaves and limbs, get his feet back on the ground. Last time he walked to the fence, gazed at the road below, and shook his head. By dark, he felt kind of dirty. Had to bathe in the creek. His bony butt resting on the rocks, head sticking out of the water. He looked across a mossy bank at a deep patch of sky and said, "That is one deep bucket." Don't get me wrong, Sam likes a little action now and then, digs out his ride and goes to the Buzzard's Roost, a little tavern he knows where cowboys and poets hang out, and barroom girls. Sam likes to dance, and he likes those girls. He likes the way they like the way he laughs, especially Louise. She tells him, "You smell like creek water," which really sets him off. He says, "Want to ride my Harley? I know this swimming hole." Of all the things that make Sam happy, watching Louise stand on her tiptoes to peel that blouse over her head is one of his favorites. Louise likes the way it makes him laugh. This is called Freebird, because I think, honestly, by the way, a lot of this is true, if not in actual events, in dreams. Teaching people like Catherine Mansfield and Virginia Woolf and those modernist women writers did something to my soul that is the poison that makes poetry and art what it is. If it does not get inside you and give you all kinds of pain, it is not what it purports to be. So, finding out about those women and their incredible depth and their incredible insight and the incredible things they had to say that we need to know, and to also understand that most of them died young, either by suicide, and most of them suffered from one sort of mental anguish or another that was deep beyond our ability to understand. And yet they were insightful, and they had so much to give, and nobody would listen. So they died young, and they suffered. And why do we do that? I've thought for all these years now that if men had known what women were really about, we would have been on the moon and inhabited Mars probably 1,000 years ago. And we don't. And I don't get it. I don't understand why there's not a single woman composer that we know. Maybe one woman artist, an occasional woman author. What's up with that? They have more to say, better stuff to say, and nobody wants to listen. And I am ashamed. I am deeply, deeply ashamed that we don't. Surprised and disappointed too. And this is called Freebird, and it's sort of about that. Louise ain't no elf. Sam says she's a whole other species, calls her a free bird. Sometimes she just flies away, and when she comes back, she has things to say. So Sam walks with her and listens. He's in love with her voice. Says it sounds like water splashing over rocks. She tells him what she saw and what she thought about it, but never invites him along. Sometimes when she is out there, She thinks of him, thinks of what makes him laugh, and smiles to herself. Once she brought him a little silver dragon to wear around his neck. She thinks it's magic and reminds him of the elves. Sometimes when he wears it, he can look down and see it lying on her breast. This is called On the Road. I don't think I'm going to read that one, though. I think I'm going to go. I had a farm in the Sequatchie Valley years ago. And just off the farm, about 100 yards, was a tree, the likes of which you have not seen. It was God's tree. It was a gigantic oak. It had its feet in a spring, and it grew beyond anybody's imagining. I have seen the biggest oak tree. It was bigger, just nobody knew about it. And this is the tree. Sam would never buy a lottery ticket, but he found one once and he won. He won a whole lot of money. He won $900,000. And he felt like his life was over and ruined. He liked just getting by. And so he decided, well, here it is. When Sam first found out he won the lottery, he rode all the way back to the mountains of East Tennessee, said that he had to get away from all the racket. But it just came with him. So he parked under a cut by Dead Man's Curve, jumped off, and ran through the woods. About 100 yards in, he broke through some bushes into a clearing, and in the middle, there was an old red oak that spread out about 30 yards, the trunk as big as a house, the bottom limbs so thick their own weight pulled them down toward the ground before they could sweep back up at the perimeter. Sam says it's what saved him. Says, I just climbed right up one of those limbs, laid my back against the trunk, and listened to its song till I fell asleep. Next day, Sam went to the courthouse to find the owner. Bought all 109 acres for $52,000. Old man Morton laughed when he told his buddies what that stupid hippie from out west had paid. Sam went home, took a bath in his very own creek. And I think I'm going to end with one little short one, the last one about Sam. Sam doesn't care about daylight savings time, says, I don't even own a watch. Figures time's old enough to take care of itself. So folks, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. This has been really, really a lot of fun. And I hope I didn't overdo it and go too long. Poetry's good stuff. More people ought to pay attention. If you're not, you're missing out. It's those little tiny bitty things. Little tiny things that nobody knows about but you, that make it all worthwhile, and everybody ought to be writing. You ought to keep a journal when you find them. And later on, after you've digested them, that little thing, take it home. Dream about it. I have another former student when her grandfather died, he left something for her for when she was 21. And when she got the package, she came to see me, this envelope. I might lose it right here. That it was a collection of his poetry, and it was so good. And she was so proud of her grandfather writing about the time in the old jalopy, parked on Lover's Lane, being constantly interrupted by passing headlights. You write this stuff if for no other reason than it keeps it for your granddaughter. Keeps it for somebody else to find and wake up something down inside of you that needed to be woke up. Find a little poison to make you sick to your stomach with the way you've spent the last few years looking at life and the world. It's good stuff. If you miss it, when you die, you have just wasted your time. Don't waste your time.